Hello, Robs. We're back with Cruel as the Grave by Eden Southworth. Chapter 26. Get focused here. Come on, focus. Chapter 26, The Spectre. Is that focusing? No, I think it is. It was about to speak, and then it started like a guilty thing upon a fearful summons. Shakespeare. Philip Dubarry remained walking up and down the floor, foaming with impotent rage, as well as trembling with a vague and awful terror. He had a practical and scientific mind and could understand everything that might be governed by known laws, but he could not understand this unwelcome visitant that had appeared to everyone else in the house but himself. He was an arbitrary and despotic man who enforced his will upon all connected with him, and ruled all flesh with a rod of iron. But he could not rule the spirit, and he knew it. He could not lay this ghost of his guilt. There was one grain of truth in the ton of falsehood that he had been told to his unconscious wife, to account for the apparition seen by her. There really was a Millie Jones, the daughter of a poor family in the mountains, and she really did come occasionally to the house to ask for broken victuals and old clothes, but instead of being a beautiful black-eyed and black-haired little gypsy, in the picturesque red cloak, she was a pale-faced, light-haired, poor-spirited-looking creature in a faded calico frock and an old plaid shawl. And instead of being the family pet with the run of the house, she was the family nuisance, strictly prohibited from passing the bounds of the servants' hall. So when that day, being a rainy day and therefore highly favorable for attention to domestic matters, Mistress Alicia Dubarry called the house steward to her presence and ordered him to send a small pension of $2 a week to the Jones family, with an intimation that Miss Millie need not come to collect it. The order was promptly executed to the satisfaction of all the domestics, and poor Millie, glad to be relieved from her fatiguing journey and degrading mendicity, was seen no more at Shut Up Dubarry. But Mrs. Dubarry did not, therefore, get rid of her visitor. Not more than 3 days had elapsed since the issuing of her order when, one evening between the lights, she entered her own bedroom and saw the girl in the red cloak sitting quietly in the easy-chair beside the fire. "How dare you come here after the message I sent you? Get up and be gone, and let me never catch you here again," angrily demanded the lady. The apparition melted into air, but as it disappeared, the words came, like a sigh borne upon the breeze. "I wait." The lady was about to dress for an evening party, and so she paid no attention to any chance sound. But the next morning she met the girl in the hall, and the next evening in the parlor. Again she passed the figure on the stairs or encountered it in the drawing-room. The lady lost patience and sent for the house steward to her presence. "Did I not command that girl should not come here again?" she sternly demanded. "Yes, my lady," respectfully answered the man. "Then how is it that she comes here as much as ever? My dear lady, she has never entered the house since your ladyship gave the order that she was not so to do. But she has. I have seen her here at least a half-dozen times. Dear lady, I dare not contradict you, but poor Millie Jones has been down with the pleurisy for these 2 weeks past, and could not have got out of her bed, even if your ladyship had ordered her to come." "Isaac, is this true?" "True as truth, your ladyship, which you can find it out for yourself by riding up to the hut and seeing the poor girl, which it would be a charity so to do. And you say she has not been here for a fortnight?" "No, madam." "Then, in the name of heaven, who is it that I meet so often?" slowly and sternly demanded Mrs. Dubarry. Old Isaac solemnly shook his gray head and answered never a word. "What do you mean by that? Speak, I will have an answer. Who is this silent girl in the red cloak, I ask?" repeated the lady. "Madam, I don't know, and that is what I meant when I shook my head," replied the old man, trembling. You don't know. Do you dare to mock me? Far from it, my lady, but goodness knows I don't know. But you have seen her, dear my lady. I don't know who she is, nor dare I speak of her. The master has forbidden us to do so. Us so to do. There, madam, ask the master, but oh, for pity's sake, do not ask me further, pleaded the old man very humbly. The lady turned white with jealousy. There was but one interpretation she could put upon this mystery. Go and say to your master that I would feel much obliged if he would come to me here, she said, grimly seating herself. The trembling old man went to the kennels where Mr. Dubarry was busy doctoring a favorite setter, and delivered his message. Dubarry was still enough in love with his 3 months' wife to come quickly at her call. Philip, exclaimed the lady, as soon as she saw him enter the room, once for all, I wish to know who is this girl in the red cloak, and why am I daily insulted with her presence in this house? Dubarry went pale as usual at the mention of the apparition, but he faltered out, with what composure he could command, I told you who she is, Millie Jones. No, begging your pardon, she is not Millie Jones. Millie Jones has been ill with pleurisy at home on the mountain for the last 2 weeks, and I have sent her a pension of $2 a week. No, this is no Millie Jones, and I insist on knowing who she is. Then, if she is not Millie Jones, she is a creature of your own imagination, for no other living girl comes to the house, answered Dubarry doggedly. You will not tell me who she is? Very well. When next I see her, she shall tell me, silent as she is, said the lady, grimly setting her teeth. Dubarry arose with a sigh and went back to his ailing setter. But his thoughts brooded over the subject of the apparition. The lady kept her word at a fearful cost. For the remainder of the day, her conduct towards her husband was so cold and repelling as to wound and offend him. So it happened that when the hour for retiring came that night, she went up to her chamber alone. She had but time to reach the room when all the household was startled by a piercing shriek and a heavy fall. Mr. Dubarry, soon followed by all the servants, rushed upstairs to Mrs. Dubarry's room. They found the lady extended on the floor in a deep swoon. She was raised and laid upon the bed, and proper means taken to revive her. When at length she opened her eyes and recognized her husband, she signed for every one else to leave the room, and when they had done so, she turned and took his hand and kissed it, and fixed her wild and frightened eyes upon him, and whispered in an awestruck tone, Phil, dear, I wronged you. I took that creature in the red cloak to be a sweetheart of yours, Phil, but it was not. It was a specter. There was silence between them for a minute, during which she never took her scared eyes from his pale face. He was the first to speak. Summoning up as much resolution as he could muster, he affected a light laugh, and answered, Spectre, my sweet wife, there is no such thing. Ah, but if you could have seen what I saw, felt what I felt. Nonsense, dear one. You were the subject of an optical illusion. No, I was not. Hush. Let me tell you what happened. I came up into this room. It was warm and ruddy with the firelight and the lamplight. And in the glow I saw the girl standing between the hearth and the bed. I spoke to her, asking her how she dared intrude into my most sacred privacy, and then she silently glided from the spot. But I told her she should not leave the room until she had given some account of herself, and I put forth my hand to stop her, but the moment I did so, I received a shock as from some powerful galvanic battery, a tremendous shock that threw me down upon my face. I knew no more until I came to my senses and found myself here, with you watching over me. Now, Philip, tell me that was an optical illusion, if you dare, said the lady solemnly. Yes, love, I dare. I tell you that what you saw was an optical illusion, but what I felt, what a very slight attack of catalepsy. Both the vision and the fit, dear, took their rise in some abnormal state of the nervous system, said Philip Dubarry, and feeling almost pleased with his own explanation of the mystery, he tried to persuade himself that it was the true one. But his wife turned her face to the wall, saying, however, well, at any rate, I am glad that the girl in the red cloak is not flesh and blood, Phil. I would rather she be an optical illusion or a fit of catalepsy. or even a specter than a sweetheart of yours, as I first took her to be. Be not afraid, you have no living rival, Alicia, answered her husband, and the reconciliation between the husband and the wife was complete from that time forth. Not forth, not Bostonian. But somehow the condition of the lady was worse than before. She was haunted. She knew herself to be haunted, but whether by a spectral illusion or a real specter she could not know. In the glow of the firelight, in the shadow of the bed curtains, in the illuminated drawing room on the dark staircase, wherever and whenever she found herself alone, the vision of the girl in the red cloak crossed her path. She did not speak to it or try to stop it again. She did not wish to risk another such an electric shock as should cast her shuddering on her face. But her health wasted under the trial. Her nerves failed. She grew fearful of being left alone for an instant. Nothing would this chapter goes on and on. Nothing would induce her to go into any room in the house without an attendant. She contracted a habit of looking fearfully over her shoulder and sometimes suddenly screaming. Nor was the mistress of the house the only sufferer from this abnormal state of the nervous system. As the master of the house preferred to call the mystery, the servants grew so much afraid to move about the building alone that their usefulness was much impaired. And at length one after another ran away and took to the woods and mountain caves, preferring to starve or beg rather than live in luxury in the haunted house. Now, new servants were procured to supply the places of the old ones until the latter could be brought back, but none of them stayed long. Nothing can induce them to remain in the haunted house. The story of the gypsy girl's ghost got around in the neighborhood. Not all the despotic power of Mr. Du Barry could prevent this. The house came to be pointed out and avoided by the ignorant and superstitious as a haunted and accursed spot. Even the more intelligent and enlightened portion of the community gradually forsook it, for it was not very agreeable to visit a family where the mistress was so full of flaws and starts that, even at the head of her own table, she would often startle the whole company by suddenly looking over her right shoulder and uttering a piercing scream. And so the house was abandoned by high and low, rich and poor alike, and the worthy gossips of the neighborhood wisely nodded over their teacups and declared that the deserted condition of the house was but just a retribution for the sins of its master. And in the meantime, the health of the mistress grew worse and worse. The most serious fears were entertained for her life and reason, death or insanity seeming to be the most probable issue of her malady. Medical advice was called in. The doctor, either in complacence or sincerity, agreed with Mr. Du Barry's theory of the patient's condition, ascribing her illness to an abnormal state of the nervous system. And he advised change of air and scene, and he held forth good hopes that within a very few months, when the young wife should become a mother, her health would be perfectly reestablished. Under those circumstances, early in the new year, Mr. Du Barry took his wife to Williamsburg to spend the winter among the gaieties of the colonial governor's court. The haunted house was shut up and left to itself. Not a man or woman could be found to live in it for love or money. In the glories of the colonial capital, Mrs. Du Barry completely recovered from her nervous malady. She was visited by no more optical illusions or cataleptic fits. She even grew to regard her former visitations in the same way in which her husband pretended to view them, as mere nervous phenomena. And as the fashionable season at Williamsburg closed, and as the spring opened, Mrs. Du Barry expressed an ardent desire to return to the shut-up Du Barry for her confinement. The heir of the manor should be born on the manor, she said. Mr. Du Barry had great doubts about the safety of this measure and attempted to dissuade his wife from it, but she was firm in her purpose, and so she carried it. It was early in the royal month of June that the young wife was taken back to her country home. Shut Up Dubarry looked as little like a haunted house as any house could look. Waving woods, sparkling waters, blossoming trees, blooming flowers, singing birds, all the richness, beauty, and splendor of summer turned it into a paradise. Besides, Mrs. Dubarry brought down half a dozen young cousins of both sexes with her, and they filled the house with youthful life. Under these circumstances, the old servants were tempted back, and all went on very well until one day one of the young girls suddenly spoke out at the full breakfast table and asked, "Alicia, who is that strange, silent girl in the red cloak that is always following you about?" Mrs. Dubarry grew deadly pale, set down the cup that she had held in her hand, but she did not attempt to speak. "Have I said anything wrong? I did not mean to do so. I am sure I beg pardon if I have," faltered the young cousin, looking from the pale face of Mrs. Dubarry to the troubled countenance of Mr. Dubarry. "I am very sorry if I have said anything wrong," repeated the little cousin in dismay. No, you have said nothing amiss. But it is a very painful subject. Let us drop it," replied Mr. Dubarry, rather inconsistently, and everyone around the table silently wondered what the matter could be. When breakfast was over and the husband and wife found themselves alone together, Mrs. Dubarry seized his arm and whispered, "Oh, Philip, the spectre has not gone." "My dearest Alicia, you have not fancied that you have seen it lately?" No, but she has seen it. Kitty has seen it, always following me. She took it for a real girl, as I did at first. What could Philip Dubarry say to all this? Only one thing. "My darling, I cannot have your nerves shaken in this manner. You had no such visitations as these while we stayed at Williamsburg, and so to Williamsburg we will return immediately. Tell your maid to pack up this afternoon, and we will set out tomorrow. No objections, Alicia, for I tell you, we must go." She saw that his resolution was fixed, and she made no opposition to it. She rang for her maid and gave the necessary directions, and then, feeling very unwell, she sent down an excuse to her company and retired to bed. At 12 o'clock that night, while the young people were enjoying themselves in some round game in the drawing-room, and Mr. Dubarry was doing all that he could to promote their entertainment, the whole party was startled by a terrific cry coming from Mrs. Dubarry's chamber. All paused for a breathless instant and then rushed tumultuously up the stairs. At the door of the bedchamber, Mr. Dubarry turned around and waved them all back. Then he entered the chamber alone. All seemed quiet there then. The moonlight came flickering through the vine leaves on the outside of the open window, and the vine and fell fitfully upon the face and form of Alicia Dubarry, who was sitting up in bed, staring straight before her. Mr. Dubarry locked the door before he approached the bed. "Alicia," he said, "my dear Alicia, what is the matter?" "It is doom." "It is doom," she answered in an awful voice without removing her eyes from some object between the foot of the bed and the moonlit window. "Compose yourself, dear wife, and tell me what has happened. Look for yourself," she cried, her finger extended and following the direction of her eyes. "My sweet Alicia, there is nothing there but the tremulous shadow of the vine leaves cast by the moonlight," said Mr. Dubarry persuasively as he went and drew the curtain before the window, and then struck a match and lighted the lamp, but her eyes were never removed from the spot where she had gazed. "Is it there yet?" she cried. "What is there, good Alicia? There is nothing there, indeed. Yes, the dead woman and dead child. Do you not see them?" "See, no, you are in one of your nervous attacks. But tomorrow we will leave this place, and you will have no more of them." "Hush! No, I shall never leave this place again." "You shall start by sunrise tomorrow." "Hush! Listen, I will tell you what happened. I was sleeping well, very well, when suddenly I was awakened with a tremendous shock. I started up in bed and saw her, the terrible girl. She was standing at the foot of the bed looking at me and pointing to something that lay upon the floor. I looked and saw, there it is yet, the dead woman with the dead babe on her bosom. I shrieked aloud, for I knew the woman was myself and the babe was my own. And as I shrieked, she vanished, as she always does. But the dead woman and child remained, and there they are yet. Oh, cover them over, Philip, cover them over, cover them from my sight, for I have no power to withdraw my eyes from them, she exclaimed in wild excitement. Almost beside himself with distress, Philip Dubarry seized a large table cover and threw it down over the spot upon which her eyes were fixed. Ah, it is of no use, it is of no use, I see them still. They rise above the covering, they lie upon it, she cried in terrible emotion, shaking as if with an ague fit. Lie down, said Philip Dubarry, compelling himself to be calm for the sake of trying to calm her, and he took her and laid her back upon the pillow. But still she raved, like one in high fever and delirium. I have received my sentence. I am doomed. I am doomed. I have seen my own corpse and the corpse of my child, she cried. And then a violent convulsion seized her. Nearly maddened by terror and despair, Philip Dubarry rushed from the room and loudly called for assistance. The chamber was soon filled with the members of the household, not one of whom knew what to do until the entrance of the old housekeeper, who sent everybody out and requested Mr. Dubarry to dispatch a carriage for the family physician. Before morning, the doctor arrived, but the convulsions and the delirium of the lady increased in violence until just at dawn of day, when she gave birth to an infant boy who breathed and died. Then, just before her own death, she recovered her senses and grew very calm. She asked to see her child. When the nurse brought it, she kissed its cold face and bade her lay it by her side. Then the lady called her husband and whispered so faintly that she had to lean his ear to her lips to hear her words. She said, "The vision is realized in the dead mother and the dead babe. But Philip, for whose sin do we die?" Before he could make a reply, if any reply had been possible, she was gone. The mother and babe were buried together. The company at Shut Up Dubarry broke up in the greatest consternation. The story of the vision, real or imaginary, that had caused the lady's death got out. All the neighborhood talked of it and connected it with the fate of the hardly used gypsy girl whose spirit was said to haunt the house. Mr. Dubarry became a prey to the most poignant grief and remorse. He shut himself up in his desolate house, where he was abandoned by all his neighbors and by all his servants, with the exception of the old housekeeper and house steward, whose devotion to the family they had served so long retained them still in the service of its last and most unhappy representative. But awful stories crept from that house of gloom. 'Twas said that the master was always followed by the specter of the gypsy girl, that he could be heard in the dead of night walking up and down the hall outside of his chamber door, raving in frenzy, or expostulating with some unknown and unseen being who was said to be the specter that haunted the house. At length, unable to endure the misery of a solitude and superstitious terrors, Mr. Dubarry took an aged Catholic priest to share his home. Under the influence of Father Engelman, Philip Dubarry became a penitent and a devotee. At the same time, this church was but a rude chapel, erected over the old family vault. But now, by the advice of the old priest, Mr. Dubarry rebuilt and enlarged the chapel for the accommodation of all the Catholics in the neighborhood. He also added a priest's house, and Father Engelman said Mass every Sunday, while waiting for another priest to be appointed to the charge. This rebuilding and remodeling amused the miserable master of the manor during the latter part of the summer and the autumn following his wife's death. But with the coming of the winter returned all his gloom and horror. And the good old priest, so far from being able to help his patron, was himself so much affected in health and spirits by this condition of the house that he begged and obtained leave to retire to the little dwelling beside the church. The awful winter passed away, but on one stormy night in March the mansion house took fire. It was said that the haunted master of the house, in a fit of desperation, actually set it on fire, with the purpose of burning out the ghost. At all events, it seemed certain that he would permit nothing to be done to stop the flames. The house was burned to the ground. the houseless master took refuge with Father Engelman in the priest's dwelling by the church. But there also the specter followed him, nor could all the exorcisms of Father Engelman with candle, bell, and book avail to lay the disturbed spirit. Philip Dubarry, half a maniac by this time, sent away the priest, pulled down the priest's house, and took up his abode in the body of the church itself, which was thenceforward deserted by all others. But here also the spectre was supposed to have followed him. At length he disappeared. No one knew whither he went. Some say that he had gathered together his money and departed for a foreign country. Others that he had drowned himself in the Black River, though his body never was found. Some said that he had cast himself down headlong from some mountain crest, and his bones were bleaching in some inaccessible ravine, while others again did not hesitate to say that the devil had flown away with him bodily. The fate of the last of the Dubarrys is unknown. The estate, unclaimed, is held in abeyance. The house, burned to the ground, has never been restored. The church, thereafter known as the Haunted Chapel, has crumbled into the ruin that you see. And such, dear Sybil, is the story of the fall of the Dubarrys. And that will bring to conclusion chapter 26. Fearful waiting awaits us in chapter 27. I still don't think this thing's focusing, but goodbye.